Hi, welcome to chapter 31 on the American pageant. Today we're covering the American life in the roaring 20s, which is weird because we're in the 20s now. It's 2020 right now. It's 100 years ago. Wow. Not really roaring, are we? Today we're covering Seeing Red through the Prohibition experiment. We have a painting, I believe, from a magazine cover from the 1920s, kind of showing the style of the 20s, the flapper style, and kind of the image. And this is largely a cultural chapter. So let's get right into it. So it doesn't start off all fun and jazz parties and speakeasies and, doing the Charleston and all that. In fact, the year of 1919 is one of the roughest in United States history. Labor strikes, you got race riots, you have influenza epidemic, and then to top it all off, you have a Red Scare. You have a fear of communism, a fear of radicalism, and not, like the X Games, like radical man, shed the gnar, but like radical ideas, radical political ideas. And so xenophobia gripped the United States after World War I. Xenophobia is not the fear of Xena, the warrior princess. It's the fear of foreigners and foreign ideas. So anything that wasn't American was to be feared because it could topple potentially the American way of life. And this was really spurred on by the Bolshevik Revolution, which Karl Marx, said workers of the world unite in a bloody revolution and destroy the capitalist nations of the world. Well, Vladimir Lenin believed that, don't wait for the workers to do it, just start your revolution yourself. And so with this Bolshevik revolution going on and the Soviet Union being formed in the Russian Civil War, there was fear that this revolution, these workers, these riots would spread and then topple the capitalist nations of the world. The United States being the most productive and richest capitalist country in the world. So it's fears that would spread and destroy capitalism. You also have a lot of anarchy, very punk rock to start today. There's a series of bombings in 1919 and 1920 that were attributed to anarchists. Not really a lot of evidence of that, but they blamed it on the anarchists. And then also during that time, some states passed criminal syndicalism laws, which made it illegal to advocate for the use of violence to obtain social change. So you better do peaceful, nonviolent protest, okay? Don't call for a revolution. Because of this, free speech was restricted, which was already restricted in World War I because of the Sedition Act. And then so you have all these thousands of strikes that's, were a big wave across the country. And they were seen as being un-American because you have workers uniting after the war. They put aside their differences during World War I for the good of the troops. But now that the war is over and they want better pay, they want, better benefits and all that. And so you have workers uniting, and not for revolution, but for a pay raise. This is actually a car bomb, a bomb blast that hit on Wall Street. People speculated it was trying to target J.P. Morgan and his offices. It just really kind of injured some stockbrokers and some unfortunate people that happened to be passing by. Notice the statue of George Washington back here. That's the spot where he was inaugurated the first president in 1789. So strikes sweep the country. There are 2,500 strikes in 1919. And so there's evidence here for Americans that workers are uniting and that maybe the Bolshevik Revolution and this communism was coming to the United States. In American history, you just need to know that communism is bad. Okay? 350,000 steelworkers go on strike. There's violence in Gary, Indiana. There's a police strike in Boston, which the police go on strike. That's bad news. And so Governor Calvin Coolidge actually fired all the police officers for going on strike because they endangered public safety. They brought in the National Guard to protect the city until they could train and hire new police officers. Because of these charges of being communist, union numbers declined and businesses adopted the American plan. So this is all part of the Red Scare, which is this fear of communism. Attorney General A. Mitchell Palmer led raids on communists and anarchists. They arrested 6,000 people. They were in search of revolutionary materials, which I'm not sure, what is that, like a plasma screen TV in the 1920s or a smartphone or Beatles records, say you want a revolution, but maybe it's pamphlets of Marx and Lenin, bomb-making materials and things like that. They largely didn't find much or really anything, but the case that really kind of encapsulated this fear of foreigners is xenophobia with Sacco and Vanzetti. These were two Italian immigrants that were implicated in a murder of a paymaster outside of Boston. They robbed him. They maybe had connections to the mafia in 1920. And so they were charged with murder. And basically, the prosecution said, well, they're Italian and they're anarchists, so they're guilty, right? And so they were really charged and tried for who they were, not so much what they did. And they were convicted with very little evidence. They maintained their innocence to the very end. Because of who they were, the public had already implicated them as being guilty. And it created this worldwide fervor that they were executed in 1927, really without really having a fair trial. The judge in the case kind of said he wanted to make an example of the anarchist. You have a very famous Arlo Guthrie song, a folk singer about Sacco and Vanzetti called Two Good Men. Modern forensic scientists have gone back and found out that probably one of the two was guilty. The other one was maybe innocent. So this kind of it was just a little example of this fear of foreigners and this, this grip, basically panic that gripped the nation. Now on to more wholesome stuff, the KKK. The KKK was reborn because of a movie called A Birth of a Nation by D.W. Griffith. And so the Ku Klux Klan was reborn in Stone Mountain, Georgia in 1915. And this was like the version 2.0. Instead of just being anti-African American, the new KKK was anti-anything that wasn't white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, or WASP. So it grew out of the South for the first time and grew into the Bible Belt, or out of the Bible Belt, excuse me. And so it actually joined, people joined up, and there was 5 to 8 million members at one point. And it became a political force. 75 members of Congress during the 20s were Klansmen or closely affiliated with the group. They actually elected the mayor of Denver and helped the governor and senator of Colorado get elected. The old airport of Denver may or may not have been named after it, Stapleton. In Grand Junction, Colorado, Western Slope, the Walter Walker, the publisher of the Grand Junction or Daily Sentinel, was a member of the Klan. He later left the KKK and denounced it in his newspapers, but the airport is named after him as well. I'm not sure what's up with Colorado naming airports after Klansmen, but it's scary. It was estimated there was 50,000 members in Colorado. For my class, locals here, there was actually a cross burned in Rifle, Colorado in 1924. Now you're probably wondering, if you're from this area, from Western Colorado, not a lot of African Americans. They were largely anti-Catholic in this part of the country. So they were against all non-WASP groups, so Jews, Mormons, immigrants, African Americans, obviously, and all these other things. And this is their quote. I don't even want to say it out loud. You can just read it. I don't like that. Scandals hurt their membership in the 1920s. I think people figured out, it's the KKK. Yeah, you probably shouldn't join that. David Stevenson kidnapped, raped, and killed a young woman in 1925, and he was a Klansman in Indiana, and so numbers plummeted in the 20s, but still they kind of left a stain on the 1920s. As a part of that, eugenics became very popular in the U.S. Eugenics is the idea of selective breeding. That the country should try to encourage the top people to have more kids and discourage people that were a drain on society from having children. In fact, thousands in this country were mass sterilized for being a drain on society. Mental patients, prisoners, and they were forced to be sterilized by the government so they could not have children. Sounds a lot like Nazi Germany, doesn't it? Scary. Here's a Klanswoman on parade in 1928. And then this one's always very comical and a little disturbing. This is a Klan rally in Colorado Springs where they installed a Ferris wheel. I mean, just because you're from the KKK doesn't mean you can't have fun, right? I don't know. It's just a little disturbing. Wow. This anti-foreign sentiment, this xenophobia, leads to Congress acting. In 1921, the Emergency Quota Act really severely limited immigration. It put quotas on how many people could come from each country to the United States. 3% of the people of their nationality who'd been living in the U.S. in 1910 were allowed to come. And then the Immigration Act in 1924 lowered the quotas to 2%. And what it does is effectively ends the open immigration of the 19th century, and then continued in the 20th century, where just people came from all over the world, stepped off the boat and became Americans. It ends all of that. Japanese and Chinese immigrants were already banned from coming to America. These laws didn't explicitly apply to the Western Hemisphere at that time. That immigration reform or immigration issue is much later in the 20th century. It also, like I said, it ended the era of unrestricted immigration to the U.S. You have this political cartoon here showing the funnel of all the people trying to get to America. and Uncle Sam lowering, putting a 3% gate on it so not as many people can come. There was a proposal for a literacy test. In fact, that was passed where immigrants had to prove that they could read or write in a language before they could come to America. And this shows the flow of immigrants before, 1907 to 1914. 685,000 came from Southern and Eastern Europe. And you can see that the new quota severely limited the amount of immigrants that came from Southern and Eastern Europe because they weren't WASP. They weren't, they didn't look like the rest of America. They were Jewish, they were Catholic, they had funny sounding names, they had darker skin, darker hair. And you can see that the quotas for Northern and Western Europe, which looked like the rest of America at that time, pretty much stayed pretty leveled. I mean, they get a little smaller, but not the significant drop like you had for Southern and Eastern Europeans. So Prohibition. We've mentioned this many times before. This was seen as the noble experiment of the progressive movement. The 18th Amendment, ratified in 1919, banned the sale, manufacture, and distribution of alcohol. It did not ban drinking it. Nebraska was the 36th state to do that, giving it the 3/4 requisite to ratify an amendment on January 16, 1919. It went into effect a year later. Wayne Wheeler and the Anti-Saloon League were the guys that led this movement. It went into effect January 20th, 1920. That's when America went dry. Now, this was enforced by the Volstead Act. Congress passed this, and they only hired 1,500 agents to enforce the entire country on all of the borders and all the shorelines from not drinking. They had the help from local agencies, but really it's an impossible task for them to enforce. The consequences of the ban, to really have a law work, the public has to believe in it. And so most people did not believe in this. In fact, the author of the 18th Amendment, Maury Shepard, was caught with a 13,000-gallon still on his Texas ranch. So the guy who wrote the stinking thing was making his own moonshine. You get people making their own booze. You get bathtub gin. You get speakeasies. There's secret clubs where you would say a password and you can get in and have alcohol. You have bootlegging. You have men and women that are partaking. And, it kind of opens up drinking to women a little bit. The saloons were only for men, but now they speakeasies, men and women can come. And this is kind of the changing lifestyle in the 1920s. You have smuggling and hoarding, and hard alcohol was prevalent. If you're going to get illegal goods, hard alcohol packs more bang for the buck. Smuggling beer was a little more risky because it was harder to get drunk or inebriated. And so many people turned to the hard stuff. Often people made stuff in their own bathrooms, in their own bathtubs. They didn't want to make it, and they poisoned each other and caused temporary blindness, you name it. People flat out ignored the law. Cocktail shaker sales went through the roof. They actually had record cocktail shakers in New York during Prohibition. I'm not sure what they're using it for. Senator Maury Shepard, I told you guys, was caught with this still that made all this Texas moonshine. There's some good stuff on the History Channel, and also there's the Ken Burns documentary about Prohibition. Check them out if you get a chance. This is a brewery that they found in Detroit, and they were emptying it out. Whenever they show these videos, this is like a horror film to college kids, and they're just throwing away all that alcohol. This is it says no more moonshine. This is a bust in Ohio in 1930, taking care of that. We'll get a lot more into this in the next video, talking about gangsterism, because if you need illegal goods, the mafia is there for you. Hope you enjoyed this. We'll see you next time.